No, that's okay. So I see there's some people standing. I see like one chair here. Okay, one chair here. Oh, there's two more here. And there's actually three chairs up here. So not that you want to sit there, but if you want to take a chair and move it next to a table, that might be helpful.
Run behind.
So there's two more chairs on the side. Okay, so if you have a chair next to you that's empty, could you raise your hand? 1, 2, and then there's two chairs on the side there. Well, hopefully I can keep you entertained and alive enough that standing is worth it for those of you in the back. All right, let's get started. I know we have people joining us online too, and they probably don't want to hear about our chair problem. So let's get going. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my session this morning and for having me here. Just so you all know, this is actually, for me, like my ideal crowd. So I work in libraries. I've worked in libraries for about 10 years, but I don't right now. So any chance I get to be in a room full of librarians, I get really excited. And I'm also from Illinois, so the combination of being with Midwesterners and librarians is like, it's like heaven for me. So I'm really excited to be here. My favorite type of people. And thanks so much for having me this year. I was supposed to be here last year, and I was disappointed that I wasn't able to make it last year. And so I'm honored to be invited back and to give this another go this year. I want to thank you for your patience, and I want to thank the amazing and understanding staff at Mobius who have been very helpful both last year and this year. And everything is, from my perspective, has gone really well. And being someone who runs a conference, I know how complicated it is and all the logistics that go into it. So I think I'm just really impressed with everything so far at the conference. Also, just to give you a caveat about my talk. While this was listed as a tech services talk, and this is the area I worked in when I was a librarian, this talk is probably quite a bit broader than just about tech services, as my areas of interest in the profession have grown, and I've had the ability to take a deeper dive into areas I didn't get to directly explore in my day-to-day work as a librarian. So a little later in my talk, I'm going to tell you about data and society. And you can see my my bio in your program. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about data and society, which is where I work right now. But just in case you're curious, I'm a fellow right now at a think/do tank, because we do stuff there. We don't just think about stuff. In New York City, that's focused on the social, cultural, and ethical implications of living in a data-centric networked world. I'm representing libraries at the table amongst other fellows. So there was 12 of us in this inaugural year. This think tank was created by Dana Boyd, who's a principal researcher at Microsoft Research. So I get the fun job of representing libraries. Fellows come from or study in areas related to human rights, civic tech, law, data-driven discrimination, new data in the financial markets, new search engine business models that aren't just about mining our data, data-driven decision-making in public health. I think you get the picture. We're all kind of coming at the impact of current technology from very different sectors, and it's a ton of fun, and it's really it's been eye-opening and really amazing to represent libraries at that table. It's given me a chance to step outside of libraries temporarily and see the potential impact of our work and what we do and what we could do for our communities and for society. So as I prepared for this talk, I got to thinking about what brought me to this moment, to this point in my life and this point in my career. I got thinking about how I've gotten so attached to this idea that libraries, and maybe more importantly, librarians, can play an increasingly important role in our changing environment. I've come to realize my love for libraries is really a love for what librarians facilitate and the work librarians do. So being a first-generation college student, walking onto a college campus felt like arriving on a new planet. People spoke differently than what I had heard most of my life. Expectations of me were different. My peers were not like my friends back home, and my eyes were open to so many foreign things to think about and so many different ways to think about things. In my sophomore year, I started a job on campus working at the technical services department in my college library. And I had the best job because every book that arrived in my little Midwest liberal arts college went through my hands. So I added the barcodes and the security strips in every book. For the summer when I was full-time, I watched bits and pieces of every DVD that came in to ensure its quality and checked in every newspaper that arrived from all over the world. And wow, like that was amazing to me. My eyes were open to so many different topics, academic disciplines, and new ideas. I had no idea the world had so much information. The summer before I graduated, I received a summer fellowship where I got to spend the entire summer in a giant research library, reading dissertations, browsing books, finding articles, and walking around floors and floors and floors of information created by millions of individuals, all in some pursuit of creating and sharing new knowledge. I was blown away, and I was in love with information and knowledge creation. It wasn't the physical library that I fell in love with. It was the thought of people taking bits and pieces of created knowledge to create new knowledge, to think up new ideas, and to expand their own minds with new information. I knew by the age of 22 or 23 that I wanted to be part of facilitating that process in any way that I could. So between conversations with Corinne Wisalka, who was the librarian that I worked for in my library, she was the head of collection development and technical services, I saw that the field of librarianship allowed me to be part of the important and critical work of providing access to information, ensuring intellectual freedom, and creating a more informed citizenry. So I knew I wanted to be a librarian. And while I'm no longer holding every piece of information in my hands that passes through a library where I've worked, I'm still working towards those same values. These values have even led me to many times working on projects outside of traditional libraries and even the fellowship that I'm in now without making me feel like I've strayed from libraries. And that's what I want to talk about. The set of values that librarianship holds that makes it possible for us to continue to do the good work we do and to redefine our roles. Because we facilitate the process of spreading information and support the creation of new knowledge when we work in and around this field. I believe that if we examine this and other core values we have as a profession, honor them and stick to them, we have the power to think creatively about solving problems and the changes happening across formats, across our jobs, finding collaborative solutions, and ultimately changing the world. So sometimes we hear so much about digital stuff, you might think that we're in the business of digital, but we're not. We're in a much bigger and much more important business than serving up digital stuff. Don't get me wrong, that's very important stuff too. I mean, as probably some of you know, I run a conference that's all about digital stuff in libraries, the Electronic Resources in Libraries Conference. So obviously I care about the digital stuff. But I think we're in the business of facilitating information and idea exchange for real people, of access, intellectual freedom, of books, of e-journals, of discovery layers, of physical spaces and digital repositories. We're in the business of capturing history and of being a safe haven that is both a digital safe haven and a physical safe haven. We are way, way more than being in the business of digital. And we're in the business of holding true to a set of core values that our community and our society have agreed are critical for a vibrant, growing, creative, thriving democracy. We live in a very digital world. We don't just work. We don't just work in just digital worlds when we work in libraries. That makes us different. I think it makes us unique. It sets us apart from our supposed competitors. It gives us the gift of insight that only we see. I think this is good, and we need to own that. So let's talk a little bit about what we're in the business of. I want to use a little bit of our time to talk about what we've done well, what we do well now, and get us thinking about those skills could support in the future. As we dive a little into our values and skills, I want to talk a little bit about how I've carved out my niche in the field and present a few ideas I've heard where libraries might be the solution to new and emerging problems. Hopefully these will help us in the future as we think about how we can redefine our roles. So I'm going to talk a little bit about values. I want to start with the most clear and obvious value where we work. Just about everything I've done in a library throughout my career has been about access to information. This could be about how we organize information to ensure access is possible. It's about developing collections or curating content so our community can find what it needs. It's about ensuring a collection full of diverse views and perspectives. It's about considering the body of current and future users and supporting the ranging accessibility challenges amongst users. It's about acquiring and being good stewards of the funds we have to provide the best access. It's about considering how we will preserve materials and archives for future access and future users. These are all in and around libraries. We've evolved our work in these areas over time by developing new services and activities. We've seen some of this work change and grow and extend further, whether that be collaborative collection development, since we now have the ability to collaborate, organize, communicate material where they're needed, making metadata more open and accessible for our own discovery tools, or so outside discovery tools can get to our content. It has meant participating in big, sometimes centralizing activities like DPLA, which is allowing for more access and more people to play with data we have about our cultural heritage. We're being collectors and publishers of local output of our user communities. We're growing in digitizing and preserving materials in a variety of formats. Many of us have digital repositories or software, publishing software that we now manage. Some of us are lending devices so users can have experience with different tools and experimenting with different acquisitions models to make sure we're using our funds appropriately. We're playing a huge role in the ever-growing and still emerging area of data research services, including data centers, data curation, data management planning, as well as playing a role in the world of digital humanities. So I see a lot of those areas as all kind of falling under this idea of providing access to information. And how about one of my favorite things we value, which fits perfectly in line with why I became a librarian? That's fostering intellectual curiosity and ensuring freedom. Intellectual freedom is the right of everyone to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. Curiosity comes from a place where the person feels comfortable and safe enough to explore something. To me, that means ensuring a level of empowerment that comes from an ease in use of resources, whether that be teaching a 101 course, Internet 101 course for someone recently released after being incarcerated for 15 years, so therefore the ideas of the past, the growth of the Internet the past 15 years being completely foreign, or supporting research projects while embedded in a course at a university. Librarians have supported researchers through their intellectual endeavors and instructed their students to be ready for the semester's assignments. We, of course, are still empowering through support and instruction and partnerships. More than ever, we're embedded online and in classrooms. And we found new ways to connect where people are to facilitate the ability for an individual to be curious and enjoy the freedom of intellectual curiosity. I especially love how libraries have allowed space for more experiential learning with maker spaces and hack spaces and places for people to come and learn together more than ever. Our physical libraries are more vibrant with intellectual empowerment and curiosity everywhere. In these areas, I think we are succeeding. Another aspect of intellectual freedom, of course, is around confidentiality and privacy. ALA and our field has taken very seriously the role of ensuring private access to information. Now there are several people and organizations working to try to figure out what that looks like today. I think it was much easier to say that we were able to give our patrons privacy when that meant ensuring their checkout records were expunged. But now it's a much more kind of complicated world that we live in this area. So at Data and Society, I'm working on a few projects related to that. Working in partnership with Brooklyn Public Library and the New America Foundation's Open Technology Institute, we received an IMLS grant on a project called Digital Privacy and Data Literacy. It's a professional training program that delivers to library professionals right now in the New York City area a set of training that will provide a technical and historical overview of how information travels and is shared online, what risks are frequently encountered online, what the impacts of such research may be on users, and why this is an important topic. It will help with tools and techniques to detect and prevent privacy intrusions, insecure transmission of information, and data profiling issues. So that's one area where a lot of libraries, some public but also in the academic, are kind of seeing a potential growing role. And through a Mellon-funded project led by NISO, which is the National Information Standards Organization, we're attempting to develop a consensus framework to support patron privacy in library systems. So working both within libraries, but then also with our vendors, with our publishers and e-resource vendors, to think about what it means for patrons to have privacy and what data is kind of flowing about our users. So work is being done to redefine our roles in this area, and I think that that's really important. While this may not seem so obvious for every type of library, I think a core value for libraries is as a place that fosters democracy. A democracy requires an informed citizenry. To me, that's core to what we strive to facilitate. Libraries are an essential good and are fundamental institutions in democratic institutions, or in democratic societies. Publicly supported libraries provide free, equitable, and equal access to information for people in the community that they serve. Our devotion to education and lifelong learning for ourselves and for our users demonstrate that. Adam Davis from the Center for Civic Reflection said libraries, which are often seen as products of democracy, can also be seen as engines of democracy, as places where people go to engage with one another and to begin making a difference. Whether we're improving access to information, empowering individuals, or facilitating the way for true intellectual freedom, I believe we are all in the business of creating the kind of world that we want to be a part of. So if you think about library professionals, people who organize, people who provide access, people who give context, who curate, who make information accessible, and then serve it up in useful ways, how could that be useful in new contexts? Where else can we be? How else can we help our communities make and grow and learn as individuals? How will the future of education look? What will the future of education look like? And how can we continue the role of empowerment and curiosity? What does lifelong learning look like, and how do libraries fit that? So here are a few places where we are or we could be defining new roles, and some of this has to do with what I'm seeing being at Data and Society. So obviously the big one for me is data. Big data, small data, research data, open data. There's so much going on here on the government data side, the research data side, and this newer area of corporate data sharing for good. meaning companies sharing telecommunications or social media data to groups like humanitarian groups. We currently have a fellow looking into this area right now. At Data and Society and in various places, I've heard about this growing concern about getting access to all this data, making this findable, having a trusted source to host it. There's conversations about data provenance, cleaning up data, and the inaccessibility of some data sets. For many, from what I hear, it appears as though a new wheel has to be invented. People see these problems as ones that have never been tackled before. This is where I chime in and say, you know, libraries do these things, and we've been doing these things for a long time. We see a growth in civic engagement, mostly around civic tech. This involves more transparency around government data and information, more accessibility to data sets, so citizens can play with data. How can libraries play a bigger role in that? I hear people complain about the bad metadata wrapped around open government data, which makes it still very hard to use and manipulate. It's hard for new knowledge to be created with open data, open government data, without people who know about organization of information, description, and access. I know some libraries are involved in this, and others have been for a long time, but the scale and the growth means that we will have a bigger role here. As big data, open data, and government transparency becomes the norm, who will consider the ethical implications of the use and reuse and the safety of those whose data is being used? I think that's a whole growing area that we don't have a lot of questions for yet. Another area for libraries is in the open movement. Libraries have done a good job supporting the open access movement. As this continues to catch on and grow, how can our ideas expand and our tolerance for trying new business models and new ways to support the movement? How can libraries continue to support the open educational resources movement as well? As our rights online are diminishing and we are being watched by government, by law enforcement, and commercial entities, as we are seen more and more as just numbers and likely purchases of products and services online, what is the role of libraries in securing what little online privacy may be left? And how can librarians empower citizens to know what's happening to them online? Maybe there's new roles for libraries in the ever-growing sharing economy, in the critical evaluation of new tools and services online, and or in the increasing STEM literacy area. These are just some places where we are or could be defining new roles that fit our skills and values, where we can reinvent libraries and envision a different future. So this is a quote from Tim O'Reilly, and I'm a big fan of Tim O'Reilly because he's someone I feel like has kept true to a set of values within an industry that doesn't always look to the same values, and he's helped change the publishing industry and can still have a business that's sort of thriving and constantly changing. You know, and is able to kind of be in an industry where he's able to do that. I watched a recent interview with Tim O'Reilly, and the topic of disrupting came up. Tim seems very dismissive of this idea of disruption. He prefers words like creating and inventing, and I think I like those words better because sometimes I think we think of words like disrupting like something that some tech guys in Silicon Valley do. Reinventing and creating seems more accessible to me and more like something any of us can do and a lot of us are doing. So I believe true innovation and true change comes from distilling down to our core values and creating the future we, with these values, want to see. And so I like this idea of what he's saying, that it's not about trying to sort of disrupt something that already exists, but us with the values that we have, what is the future we want to create? And I think libraries need to ask themselves, librarians need to ask themselves that, because we have a set of values that are very unique in the world. And so that's where I came in. With these values, we should be creating the vision for the workplace we want to work in, the libraries we want to be for our communities, and the society we want to live in. So I like Tim's way of thinking. As I made clear in my story, I'm not in the library business. I'm in the facilitation business, the facilitation of information and support in the hopes that new knowledge will be created and new ideas will enter the world. That's what drives me forward, and that's part of my core values that allow me to comfortably look beyond a day job and look at my user community and at the society around me and make me think, what world can I help create that would allow for that? It's questions like that that led me to create the ERNL conference 11 years ago, and it's why I chose to temporarily leave a library to take a fellowship at Data and Society, and it's why I'll come back to libraries. So for those who don't know, I created the ERNL conference 2 years out of library school because I saw a problem and I wanted to find a solution. Libraries were struggling to figure out how to manage all this e-stuff, and they needed tools that worked. They needed administrator support. They needed to update staff skills, and they needed the power of other libraries to talk with vendors and publishers about what would work for libraries in terms of business models and tools. It seemed clear to me that we needed to work together to solve some of these problems. Thus, the ERNL was born and just celebrated its 10th anniversary a few months ago. We've come a long way, and it's been so fulfilling to see how the profession has quickly adapted and found new problems to solve over the years. So like Tim O'Reilly's quote, I just wanted to see a profession that could nimbly respond to new and developing areas. And that's why I created ERNL. I don't know about you, but I feel like there are more people doing stuff like that now. How many of you have read or watched anything about the Knight Foundation's news challenge for libraries? There are some really fantastic projects by individuals and groups, and it's really exciting for me to see this like growth and entrepreneurial spirit in the profession. So part of why I went to Data and Society is because I would attend like tech conferences where I was personally interested in, and I would be sitting in on sessions like I attended a South by Southwest Interactive conference a few years ago, and I sat in on a session and I said, either a librarian needs to be on this panel or librarians are talking about these topics. These are not new issues in library worlds. Maybe it's just a different terminology or a different kind of way of looking at it, but there's a lot of interest, a lot of ideas and a lot of kind of interesting things happening in maybe the more tech world that that I thought libraries would have a really interesting perspective on. So when Data and Society had an open call for fellows, my proposal was simply that libraries should be at the table, that we have a lot of the values and skill sets that I talked about, and that libraries should be part of shaping the kind of modern world that we live in now. Check my time. Okay. So how do we continue to create our futures? I think we do that by looking for solutions to current problems, where the solutions involve the skills we have at hand. What does that mean? So, so you're Midwesterner, so I know you want to know the practical stuff. I can say that because I grew up in Illinois and I went to college and graduate school in Wisconsin, and I've never realized how much Midwesterners were sort of these no-nonsense, pragmatic, but also very nice people until I lived in other parts of the country. And my partner, who's from Texas, points out regularly when I'm being my no-nonsense, no-drama, pragmatic Midwestern self. So I like knowing that we're kind of known for that. So let's start locally and work outward. So first, we must create workplaces that allow for experimentation and failure and iteration. We must spend less time on sort of internal politics and more time focusing on our very important goals. So I'm sure many of you come from academic libraries, and there's been several people that are attributed to saying something along the lines of, the politics in academia is so vicious because the stakes are so low. But it's different for libraries. The stakes for our success are too high for a lot of that stuff. We need to support good quality professional development. Updating our skills must be a priority. So regionally, I think collaboration is key. Very few of the ideas for future work for libraries can be done by one library or one librarian. We are considering redefining our roles for ourselves, we must consider at scale, and that means extensive cooperation and collaboration. For our communities, we must be more aware of the needs. That could mean being more embedded, more out front, more aware of community needs. This could mean being more user-centered with all of our services and our products. For the future of our society, I think we need to be where the conversations that matter to us are happening. So being at the table where we feel that a role needs to be. And again, that's partially what I feel like my role has been at Data in Society. How can I bring what's happening outside of libraries back to the library community, and how can I bring the perspective of the library profession back to those communities? So libraries are in a unique position, and librarians have a unique role to play. So in terms of the work they do and the ethos underlying how and why they do it. The environment we create at work and within our networks, the roles of libraries in our communities, and really the future of our society needs to be created by people with that ethos. And that's us. Being an entrepreneur, being an active part of solving problems, reinventing our roles, and thinking creatively about the future means we're not waiting for somebody else for what we want. We're creating our own future, the future we want to live and work in. And thank you. Thanks for listening. I spoke fast, so I know we have plenty of time for questions. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes.
I have a question in terms of how do you bring individual interactions and talk about helping one person across a service point. How can you bring that interaction to scale?
Give me an example. What do you mean?
I gave a question, an example I could answer my question. What I'm trying to struggle with is so many of the users that we encounter have individual problems, and it's a large problem that is shared by a number of people, but it's expressed in an individual way. And if you look at the Amazon or the Google, they're able to kind of shift their focus to addressing you, even though it's at scale, almost as an individual, if you will. Do you see a way that we can mirror that type of individual interaction in a manageable environment with a large audience?
That's a really good question. So how do we do what we do so well? One, but how do we do that sort of at scale? Well, I think it kind of depends on what we're talking. So if we're talking about, kind of like web interactions that happen over the internet, kind of how are we able to facilitate maybe people who are similar questions as we sort of and in seeing various levels in libraries at, for instance, at Harvard, as I was telling the folks I had dinner with last night, it was a very interesting and complicated to be at Harvard, where there was some major transitions, centralization, and I had staff. I had 5 managers, but essentially I had 50 across 7 libraries. Often they had come from working just within that library and not being part of a bigger centralized organization. What I think is really important is at a leadership level, so at my level and at higher levels, that a lot of that, how we work, a lot of sort of that culture, I guess, the sort of culture change that would need to happen from above. It needs to be kind of stated what types of behaviors are acceptable at work, and how we can work collaboratively, whether that means working more in like a project management style, where we have certain sort of tasks and deadlines and things sort of move at a certain pace, or decision who is making decisions are very clear from the beginning of projects, rather than sort of things moving along without clear framing, without clear, sort of saying this is what the project is. It's not all these other things, and just sort of having clear boundaries about what's acceptable at work and what sort of are the goals and the big things that we want to do to move forward. And I think internal politics can really slow things down. And of course, we're all humans, we're all people. We're going to have conflict along, and we're not going to get along, and that's just part of life. But I guess the point I was trying to make in this talk was that we do have a lot that we can be a part of. And I would hate to see library organizations, whether that's like associations or that's within an individual library, be sort of getting in the way of themselves. So how can we figure out how to sort of make progress and move forward without getting in the way of ourselves? So I think it's partially leadership. It's just partially just creating a culture that allows for that kind of work and that kind of thinking, and that sort of behavior is rewarded.
So kind of essentially always comes back down to good communication and having leaders in place that are able to help facilitate that.
Yeah. And so my philosophy when I've been in management positions or leadership positions has always been, it's kind of like this talk. I like to be able to sort of set the boundary, or like sort of the road that people, in all their creativity and all the hard work they want to do, the road that they're heading down. So it's not about stopping people's progress along the way, but I see leadership as more about moving barriers out of the way and creating the space so that all the people that work for me can progress and can improve and can have that opportunity to experiment and iterate and try new things, without sort of the barriers that could get in the way of that. Question in the back.
Hi, I'm a first-year librarian at the university, and my question is, how do you go about, I would say, sharing with the faculty body what the library really is without making them feel as though that they don't know it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting. So you say faculty. I've also been involved in a lot of kind of strategic planning from the community perspective, meetings at New York Public Library. So you also have a whole community coming in, trying to help shape the future of the library, that has in their minds what they believe about libraries, or maybe that important memory they had as a child that made them connected to the library. And in my day-to-day work at Data and Society, people have, it's taken me, now I've been there about 9 months, and I'd say probably 2 months ago, I could see on a number of people's faces sort of this aha moment of getting what library, beyond what they think of libraries. So I would first talk to them about libraries. They would immediately think of, like many of them have PhDs, so they would immediately think of the experience they had with the library when they were doing their research, or the librarian that helped them, or they thought about, again, like thinking about when you're a child and you were learning how to read. What I realized is that everybody comes to conversations around libraries with their own with their own sort of perspective of how they see libraries. And oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, it's maybe even more than 9 times out of 10, it's a very positive view of libraries. It's just not always like kind of a more modern view, or it doesn't really take into account all that we do. So what I've tried to do is play up on that sense of positivity and the sense of trust. Again, kind of pulling it down to more about values, and then trying to build on that, sort of using those same values that they feel from their experience when they were researchers, or when they were children and say, but those are still the same values we have now. But here are these other cool ways that we're doing work in that area, or here's how we get to that place in today's modern world. Any other final questions? Yes.
About embedded librarianship, when we talk to faculty and we try to share what we have and our resources, many of our faculty sort of scoff and feel like we're stepping on their toes. We want to take over their course, and that's not the easy to here to assist, but I don't know how to something that would.
Yeah, and I mentioned embedded, but I feel like I'm definitely not the most qualified person to do that. In fact, we have an awesomely qualified person in Char Booth, who's in the back of the room, that I think who will be speaking later today, and I think would probably be a better person to talk about kind of real strategies around that sort of thing. It'll be part of her talk, and Char and I worked together for a short time at the Claremont Colleges, and she was just absolutely amazing with faculty. So definitely listen to what she has to say. Anything else? All right. Well, I'll be around all day today, so stop by and say hi if you'd like.
We have many more attendees in the evaluation form, so if you were lucky enough to get the evaluation form, please take a moment to fill that out, and I can take those from you back here at the back of the room. Just follow the loud moving voice.
I'm just curious, what's the name of that digital privacy group based in New York? I didn't catch the whole thing. I wanted to look at that.
So there's the IMLS grant. Is that what you're talking about? The IMLS grant or the NISO grant?
Right, the one that like the Brooklyn Public Library.
Right. So that it's on IMLS's website. We just got the grant.
IMLS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's through Brooklyn Public Library, and it's called the Data Privacy. I think it's called the Data Privacy Literacy Project.
Data privacy.
And I know Brooklyn Public Library just had a press release that came out, and Data and Society, where I am, we just had a recent posting about what we're doing.
Great.
It's a new project. If you're interested, just stay in touch, and I can let you know what we're doing. And
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's like a centimeter away.
And if you move, just the seizure and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you made me change my stuff. Really? I want to tie it in to work.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then I go to standing there.
Yeah.
It's good. It's awesome to hear you. Here to speak other than at ERNO.
Yeah.
It's, in the leadership panel that we did.
Well, I'm not like you and Jason. I'm kind of new to Keynote. I've done some times.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I think with the RNL for like 10 years, it's like it took up so much of my outside professional work that I don't like. I presented much more like earlier in my career. Just this big chunk, like between ERNL and like these bigger and bigger jobs, like presenting just kind of stuff. But I actually enjoy it. I enjoy it more than writing.
Well, and you're really good at pulling questions part too. So very good.
It was great.
Thank you.